Let's take a look at our top story right now. More than 100 million Capital One customers had their personal information hacked in one of the largest thefts of data from a bank in history. The suspect, Paige Thompson, formerly worked for Amazon Web Services and was arrested in Seattle last night. Joining us now is Yahoo Finance's Brian Cheung with more details on this. Now, the suspect had not worked for Amazon Web Services for several years, but had sort of bragged about doing this online.
Yeah, so she did brag about doing it, and interesting because contacts that I've spoken to have said that actually it doesn't require any sort of internal access as an Amazon employee to do what she did, that this hack may have been the result of a vulnerability in Amazon Web Services that anyone could really exploit. It just happened to be that she had enough knowledge of it because of her experience at AWS. Again, you identify 33-year-old Paige Thompson. She was arrested by the FBI in Seattle yesterday. And interesting because Capital One announced at the same time that this breach had occurred. Again, 100 million or so customers in the United States. This covers credit card accounts, but also those who applied for credit cards. So just because you don't have a Capital One credit card account doesn't necessarily mean that you were not affected by this. In addition to that 100 million, also 6 million or so in Canada. Only a small fraction of these affected users actually had social security numbers breached. The company says 140,000 was the figure, so a small fraction of the large pie on the whole. But again, FBI looking into not only how Paige Thompson was able to do this, but what she was actually doing it for. Unclear about what that data ended up being used for, or if she passed it on to anybody else. Seems like investigators are still looking into that. But again, Paige Thompson being held in Seattle for the moment.
What are we hearing, not just from Capital One, but also from Amazon and Amazon Web Services on this?
Yeah, well, trying to get in touch with both companies. Again, Capital One did have this statement yesterday, hoping to get in touch with Amazon sometime this morning. Again, it seems like the dust is still settling, but when it comes to these types of cybersecurity issues, there's kind of a gray area in terms of where the responsibility lies in preventing these types of attacks. So if you recall, actually in 2017, there were a few Amazon AWS data exposures where companies like WWE, in addition to Verizon, which is actually Yahoo Finance's parent company, had some issues where they actually set up their infrastructures in a way that actually allowed some customer data to be public. This was not the case for Capital One, where even though they had a private server, it was actually a employee or former employee of Amazon that was able to kind of go rogue, use her knowledge of the activity to actually pry open the accounts at Capital One and then download it, export it for her own purposes. So a little bit of a different story here. But again, Capital One and Amazon still trying to work through this. Capital One on their part estimates that it'll be about $100 million to $150 million impact as they work through the legal costs and also restitution fees as a result of this.
Brian Cheung, thank you so much. And we're joined by today's panel now, Cornell Capital partner Ann Barry and Yahoo Finance's Scott Gamm. Also joining us is CompareCards Chief Industry Analyst Matt Schultz. Matt, thank you for joining us. As we look at this situation and dig through the details of it, it's difficult to see how, as a customer, one could have protected oneself in this kind of situation. I mean, what do consumers need to know?
Yeah, you're right. This is a situation where there's not a whole lot that the customer can do. And unfortunately, that's the case in a lot of these data breaches. And it's reason number 5 million why people need to build regular identity theft and fraud protection checks into their regular routine. When you're checking your bills, when you're paying off your bills every month, make sure that you take some time to review those credit card statements and make sure that nothing looks amiss.
Matt, I'm curious, and I don't know if you can address this, but the potential relationship with the cloud service provided by AWS, by Amazon. This could be a weakness in Capital One's firewall. There may be something else going on there. If I'm, as a consumer, I trust the bank as my first protection, but if the banks are all going to the cloud and the cloud is a third party, is there anything I can do?
Yeah, it's tough as a consumer in that circumstance because you don't really have any say. And the truth is that it's not just banks that are on the cloud. It's companies of all shapes and sizes and styles. So as a customer, it really is all about watching on the back end, checking your statements, getting your credit report, getting your credit score, making sure that nothing unusual is happening. And if something is unusual that's happening, make sure that you report it as soon as you can.
Well, and Matt, that's a great point, because we know that the government, the FTC in particular, has protections in place to make consumers whole if there is some sort of suspicious purchase that is, reported on someone's credit card. Can you speak to those regulations as well?
Yeah, I mean, the truth is that if you have credit card information taken and a bad guy uses it to go on a shopping spree, you're probably not going to be out any money because of zero liability policies that the banks have that add on to some of the regulations that are out there. But it is important to understand that a credit card is the best thing to use if you're concerned about safety, because if you pay with a prepaid card or a debit card and bad guys get a hold of that, then they can take real money out of a real account that you'll eventually get back, but it may take some time. With a credit card, it's mostly just a phone call and wiping a transaction out.
Matt, for consumers trying to figure out which credit cards to try and get and apply for, does there exist out there some ranking system or scorecard that lays out what the historical performance has been by various credit card providers when it comes to cybersecurity protection?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear that.
Is there some kind of ranking of credit cards by their history of being most secure when it comes to hacks and cybersecurity?
Sure. Not that I am aware of. I mean, the truth is that there have been so many of these hacks, and there's so many people out there trying to get a hold of this information that it's understandable that people would see these sort of hacks and they kind of become white noise, because so many issuers and so many banks and so many companies have had issues with this sort of thing. So I don't know of any ranking, but the truth is that people just need to make sure that they do things that they can to protect themselves.
Yes, what is within our control, although maybe it's not much at the end of the day. Thank you so much. Matt Schultz, CompareCards Chief Industry Analyst. Appreciate it.